we're going to get started now. So I'm Shawn Fraser from Pinnacle Health Informatics, and we are a data shop, and we deal in healthcare analytics, and we love dealing with the data. And today we want to talk about one aspect of the data, that is the geocoding, and that's the ability to transfer the data into a precise latitude and longitude from an address. And this is very helpful in looking at how you're serving clients or how healthcare is being distributed. And it can be a very useful arrow in your quiver, so to speak. And so today we're going to look at one way to do it. And what I like to do is I like to use the Google Geocode API, and we're going to show that here shortly and how that works. And I'm joined today by Gary Clark and Julie Reidman, and they'll be supporting and facilitating this webinar. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to ask, and we'll get those answered for you. And we'll provide you with the code that we're going to look at today, as well as the links to some of these items. So we want to empower you to take advantage of some of these resources if you're interested in geocoding. The Google Geocode API is free. You may have seen that on the screen earlier, but an account is required, and you can process thousands per hour. And I've had hundreds of thousands processed overnight. And some of the services only let you do a certain number, but the Google one is quite robust, and you can do a lot of services. And you can, or anything you want to look at. And today we're going to look at some data that I have processed on services, and then I've randomized the data so that every latitude and longitude is off by some random amount, so that it doesn't represent really any legitimate address or anything like that. So with that, again, if there's any questions, please ask them, and we will be providing the code here that we're using today. So let me jump over to another screen, and we will show you. Okay, so on this screen here, I wanted to show you the Google API here. Let's see. Let me get that up on the screen. Okay. So this is one of my Google API dashboards here, and you can see here that there's different ways to manage that. You can chart how many thousands per hour have been processed, and you can look at all of your API calls, and you can monitor that. And you can set up your own project. You'll need to get an API key to facilitate this, and that identifies you uniquely as the user of that process. And so basically, once we have our Google API and our key, then we do have to go through some code here. I'll show you a little bit of this code. And like I said, I can send this out to you. And there's some links here that have been used to assemble this code, and you can see those here at the top of the screen, and I'll provide those. And most everything's been done here in the code, so it's not really there's not a lot you have to do with it. You do have to check out a few things on your server. If you're running your SQL server, this is actually just run right out of SQL, so it's the SQL server executing these API calls to Google, so you don't have to build a secondary interface or anything like that. It's just running right out of SQL, which is nice. Now we do have to say on line 21 here, we do have to do things like enable some certain automation procedures. This is the OLE automation. We have to enable that. We have to ensure that we have the correct permissions to run that, and we have to make sure that we have all of the various items enabled so that the SQL server can. And I'll take any usernames or anything like that out of this process, and so you can just insert your own in here, and you can take a look at that. So what we're going to do, we won't get too into the weeds here in the SQL, because if you have staff that like to do that, then they can deal with that. But we'll create a geocode table. So for example, here's one, it's called geocode address. We're going to have to build a table to drop those into. And then we're going to build a query. And then we're going to build a data set that we can send out to Google and get the results back. And so you can see here, we're building some tables. And again, if this doesn't look familiar, we're just building a structure so that Google can return the values and we can plug them into a database. So we're going to just we'll squirt on this a little bit more. And we're going to just kind of figure out how to get the data set that we want. And what we want to end up with is like services by latitude and longitude, and then put a little randomizer in it. Okay. And we're going to build a cursor here, and we're going to loop through it. Here we're going to build the web API. And so you're going to have to put it all together. And there's our API. And we're going to just build that message and send it off. And it looks complicated, and it kind of was. It was quite a bit of work to build this, but you'll have the advantage that you'll get a working version of this. And so you can see we're going to insert some data into that table. It's going to go out and get that from Google, and then it's going to loop through it, and we're going to get all our addresses. Okay. And so what we're going to end up with, and what we ended up with, and we're not going to run it here because this could take several hours to run at this. So after we get our randomizer on the addresses, we're going to run that data, and we're going to get this table there. So that's going to be good. So we're going to get a table, and we're going to be able to plug that into our Power BI. Okay. And again, it's just all randomized data. So with that, we're going to have our data set. So let's go ahead, and we're going to show you how we did this. We're going to start with a new one, and we're just going to come up here. We're going to say get data, and we're going to go to SQL Server. So I'm in Power BI. This is just the latest version of Power BI Desktop, and anyone can download this. This is a free download, and if anyone would like to, we'll include the link if you haven't downloaded this yet. There's just you can download tons of tutorials and things like that, but we're just gonna download it. I'll supply you with a link for this. And in fact, we can start that. Let's start that fresh here. Let's do a fresh launch of that, so you can kind of see what that looks like in Power BI. This will take just a second to come up here. And this is just starting from scratch on this one. Let's just take a second to load. And we'll go ahead. Okay, we're going to get data. And we're going to say, hey, we want data from SQL Server database. We're going to connect up. And this is a server that will connect to our Pinnacle data warehouse. We're going to import some data here, and we're going to paste a query in here that queries that data that's been geocoded. We're going to say, okay. Okay, we're going to load that data up. Our sample data. It's gonna load into our model in Power BI. We did have one error, but it's not going to affect our results here. We're just going to go ahead and say, okay. You look over here on the right-hand side, we have all of our fields now from that data set that we've built. We have address, city, county. We have the fiscal year. We have the state. We have the latitude and longitude. We have the service item. So we're going to go ahead and drop in a nice map component here. We can drag that a little bit bigger. And the rule in Power BI is you always want to make sure you're working with the selected item, right? That you're not going to change your visual. So we're going to do that. We're going to drag our latitude and longitude into our fields. That's a nice, easy drag and drop feature. And you're going to see here now we're right there clustered in a geographical area, which is kind of nice. And you can see there that if we mouse over those, we can see latitude and longitude on those, which has been kind of, like I said, kind of randomized. Okay. Well, that's interesting. And see that gives us some interesting information that easily. We can zoom in and get more detailed there, move that map around and zoom out. Okay. Now, what if we want to know a little bit about these services, right? Well, let's bring in to our map the service item. And let's do that as a legend. And see, we're going to break up that service now, and you're going to look at the different services. And if you mouse over one, you're going to see what the service was. There you go. Okay, what if we wanted to filter on that? So we could actually take and build a filter on that geocode information. And let's do service item on that. We're going to do drop down. And now we can pick what services we want to see. And we can pick multiples. Now you can start to see the difference in color based on the service items that we picked. And we can also add another filter here if we'd like. We can bring in the fiscal year. Let's drag that up there a little bit. Let's then split that out. I brought 2 sample years in. And so you can switch between the years if you want. That easily. You could also bring in a heat map. Let's bring that in, or tree map. And we could look at the service items in that. And we need actually we need a number. So that may not be the best thing to bring in. Let's see, we could do that service item by, fiscal year maybe. Is that going to give us enough data? No, probably not. So that's not going to work. Let's take that out. Okay. So we can now, if we want to change this and look at it by fiscal year, we can change our legend to fiscal year. If we want to, then we can change and look at the difference in services by fiscal year if we want to. And we can kind of see if there was just one fiscal year or if it happened in both fiscal years based on that mapping. Now, what we could also do is bring in distances, and we could bring in, distance from a certain location that would help us plan better, maybe our utilization of services, based on some value, But once we have this geocoding data, we can do a tremendous amount of work with it, and we can really change it up and do different things. So it's very, very powerful. Let me pause for a minute. Any questions or comments or any thoughts or from anybody? Anybody have any feedback? You can build this into your Power BI dashboards and really get yourself a lot of really good information. And the tricky part is really the code that I showed at first. That's the tricky part. But I'm going to provide that to you guys, and anyone who wants to utilize that can use that, not just in Power BI, but for anything that you wish to use it for. All you have to do is get yourself a key, a Power BI key, and you can set yourself up with an account. So it's really that simple. And that's kind of the extent of what I wanted to show today. That was probably pretty quick. Again, the real heavy lifting is done in the code in the background. But is there any questions? Are there any questions? Anybody want to see something else again? We want to talk about anything else? We want to see any of that done again? Any part of the geocode API that they want to see? So if you look at someone, is that someone break in with a question?
Yeah, Andrew is asking, can we use straight addresses instead of longitude and latitude?
I think that there is some of that, but I like using the latitude and longitude just because it goes through kind of a checking process, and if it's not a valid address, then I get an error back, and I can go back and check those. But I think there are some mappings that will do that. I just don't think it's quite as precise as using the latitude and longitude. In addition, you want to be able to measure distances, so you can put in some reference addresses and look at distances based on two geolocations. Well, that's so the question was, you have addresses, but that's what you put into the geocode. You put the addresses into the Google API, and you get latitude and longitude back. Yeah, and I think it is it is HIPAA compliant. This is HIPAA compliant if you're using that. It's a fully encrypted, and the Google is fully encrypted, and it doesn't store your data at all. So, and this will geocode your addresses. The Google API will securely. Okay, you'd have to check. So you're saying Bing's Maps is not covered under a BAA. You'd have to check with. You could probably get a BAA agreement or some kind of a certificate of compliance that Google is encrypted and it doesn't keep your data. It just codes the address, turns it back, and then it's done. So, and that's something that I looked into before I did that, to make sure that there was nothing that persisted. But we could certainly look into getting some kind of a certificate if we needed to. And you could also look into that through Google. Does that answer your question, Andrew? Okay. Yeah, excellent. Well, good. Did we have any other questions or comments? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up, and we appreciate everyone coming. Again, that was, like I said, the heavy lifting's done in the SQL code in the background, but once you have that data, you can really use it for anything. And it gives you a rich set of information, and you can take your addresses and you can convert those in a secure way to latitude and longitude. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up unless there's other questions or anything that anyone would like to see. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We thank everyone for coming, and we look forward to our next opportunity to chat with you next month. Thank you very much.